Hi and welcome to the Unquendor Guitars workshop. My name is Daniel and in this video I'm going to talk about how I use my router table and give you some tips and tricks on how to avoid unwanted mistakes and little accidents. To get the best result from your router table, it all starts at the bandsaw or starts by cutting out your shape. I'm going to use these two neck blanks as an example in this video. So let's first start by cutting them out using the bandsaw. I'm using my bandsaw, but of course these tips I'm going to give you also apply to when you're using a jigsaw or any other method of cutting your shape from your stock material. So my first tip is try to cut as close to the line as you dare. The less material your router bit has to remove, the easier it is and the less chance of tear out. I like to leave about a millimeter of material next to the line. Unfortunately, at this point the microphone on my camera got turned off, so I have to do a voiceover for the next section. When using a router table we're going to need some bearing guided router bits, of which I explain later on. But first we need to attach the template to the workpiece and make sure it's absolutely secure. You can use, of course, double-sided tape, but I'm using masking tape and super glue. With the template nicely secured to the piece we're working on, I like to do an additional step, and that's to remove all the sharp edges left from cutting using a belt sander or a spindle sander. And this is to prevent the router bit from catching on the sharp edge, causing possible tear out. Yeah, it's very easy, nice and quick to do. Just use a sander to remove those sharp edges so your router bit won't catch. And same for the other side of the neck, just round over the corners and it makes the transition from one side to the other during routing a whole lot easier. Like I said, we're going to need some bearing guided router bits, and this is a bit from Infinity Tools from the USA. It was sent to me by one of my subscribers, for which I'm still very grateful. And the benefit of this router bit is, besides the double bearings, is that the blades are at an angle, giving a smoother finish and a smoother cutting action when using this bit in a router table. But of course you can also use a regular router bit. I've been using this one for years and it has a single bearing at the shaft side, but just make sure it's a good quality router bit. This, for example, is a CMT router bit and it also works great. But before we can start routing, we have to take a look at the grain direction of the piece we're working on. And in this case the grain is running somewhat parallel with the center line of the neck, making the grain exit at the side of the neck. So the grains are running in this direction and we have to take this into account when routing. We don't want to route against the grain, but we want to route with the grain, because the router bit can lift up some of the fibers on the end grain, causing tear out, and that's of course something we try to avoid. The router bit in a router table rotates counterclockwise, making the feed direction from your right to your left, and you always want to push your workpiece into the rotating router bit. To always route with the grain direction, these double bearing router bits come in very handy. As you can see, at the moment it's set up to have the bottom bearing guide the template, so to say. But if I would use it like this, you can see by the arrows drawn on the side indicating the grain direction, the router bit goes against the grain, possibly scooping up some fibers, creating tear out. If I would flip my workpiece around and lower the router bit so the top bearing guides on the template and use it, you can see I will always route with the grain. The spinning direction of the router bit goes with the grain, so I potentially have less chance of tear out. For these bigger router bits you need to slow down your router These infinity tool router bits, or at least the one I'm using, requires an RPM, so a revolutions per minute of 18,000. So it will turn 18,000 times a minute. So look up the speed setting on your router to match the setting described by the manufacturer of the router bit. Slowing down your router also makes for a smoother cutting action of your bit. A mistake that often happens when using a router table and a bearing guided bit is usually the first cut. I often see people trying to push their workpiece from the start straight into the spinning router bit, but it's very hard to gauge the depth you need to start at, and this might cause the router bit to instantly hack into the piece of wood, creating tear out. I recommend leading in the cut, so start just half an inch or a couple of centimeters from the start and just lead in the cut by gently pushing your workpiece into the spinning router and starting your cut. So let me make my first cut. A nice and smooth cut, and it takes a bit of practice, but it's real easy to feel the feeding speed you need for your router bit. Just start by applying a gentle pressure and you can feel how fast the router bit wants to go. This little piece we missed at the beginning will fix it when rounding this corner. Of course, a big point of safety is when using a router table or any cutting equipment for that matter, is keep in mind where your fingers and hands are at all times. Don't hold your workpiece like this with your fingers on the same side of your workpiece as where your router bit is. Always keep them tucked behind the back or flat on the surface of the piece you're working on. Routing these very tight corners, especially around corners like this, can be very daunting and can seem very scary, but it's not as scary as you might think. And with the technique I'm going to show you, you can reduce the chance of tear out a lot. Of course, if there's a weak spot in the wood right here, or you're not very confident, there's always a chance of getting tear out when using a router bit. So first I'm going to route this entire surface flush with the template, and this part is with the grain and there's a tiny bit here that's against the grain, but as long as I'm very careful and I remove as little material as possible with each pass, I should be fine. And then I'm going to show you how to make these turns. So the surface is now flush with the template and you saw me pull in the workpiece. I always like to start these kinds of cuts by pulling instead of pushing. It seems to give me more control when pulling the workpiece into the router bit instead of pushing. I also route it all the way past my template. So there's now, I don't know if it shows up on camera, but I'm a little bit past my template. This gives me a nice lead in into this corner. I'm going to switch my stance. Now I can start again by pulling my workpiece, keep an even pressure on my workpiece against the router bit and make the corner. So it's going to be this motion. Pull it in, keep pressure on the workpiece and make the cut. Here we go. So a nicely routed corner without any tear out whatsoever. And you could see me pulling the workpiece against the router bit. And this is to prevent the router bit from catching this edge, because I'm pulling it away from the router instead of pushing it into the router bit. To do this little corner, I'm going to route from the other side, because I would be routing against the grain. In order to do so, I have to turn my workpiece around, adjust the height of the router bit so I can route this part with the grain and take this corner. And here we have it, a nicely pointed top of the headstock without any tear out whatsoever. The main trick is being confident to keep an even pressure and make the transition from pulling to pushing. And this is something you can practice. Just get a piece of wood with a sharp corner, for example, and just practice how this motion feels. The same goes for this end. Same motion. I'm going to show it again. We've already routed this part. There's a little hump still here. We need to do the end grain and make the transition to the other side of the neck. And we can do it almost in one go. First, I'm going to make sure this entire side is flush with the template. Start transitioning to the end grain by making the same motion from a pulling to a pushing motion. Switch positions and do the same. So from pulling to pushing. So yeah, perfect end of the neck. Again, no tear out, no burn marks whatsoever. My main tip might be for this video, practice the motion from pulling to pushing from one side to the other side to make these corners and the transitions from plane to plane. And just like that, I now have a perfectly routed neck shape, and I'm going to do another one in a time lapse so you guys can see from this distance my process and how I move behind the router table. I wouldn't know what to do without my router table. It's such a useful tool for making guitars, shaping necks, shaping bodies and such. And yeah, I'm really happy with the router table I made. If you don't already have a router table and you're interested in making one yourself, I'll put a link to a video series I did on making this router table in the comment section down below, and of course a card at the end of this video for you guys to check out if you like. Yeah, that's it for this week's video. I hope you liked it. I hope you got some useful information from my video, and if you did, let me know by leaving a like and leaving a comment. I really appreciate it if you did. If you happen to be new to my channel, of course you can consider subscribing and hitting that little notification bell so you get notified when I upload something new and you don't have to miss out on any of my future uploads. Yeah, that's it for this week's video. I hope to see you all in the next one, but until then, have a nice week.